If when we're in the womb or during the process of being born, our parents are connected in with us, if there's a sense of communication, we don't feel so alone in our experience. It gives meaning to our experience, and this gives us resilience later in life. I'm Matthew Appleton. I'm the Director of Conscious Embodiment Trainings. I'm a psychotherapist and craniosacral therapist with a particular focus in my work on pre- and perinatal psychology. During more than 20 years of working therapeutically with adults, babies and children, I've come to see how important our experience in the womb and during birth and the time just after birth is. Generally, mainstream psychology doesn't give much credence to these experiences. We're seen more to be a bundle of biological reflexes rather than human beings who have an experience, and that experience may shape the way we feel about ourselves and feel about life later on. Now, my major focus initially was on particular stresses, particular traumas occurring during this period. But one of the things I've become increasingly aware of is a core wound that most people in our culture carry within them. And this is that we were never welcomed in as human beings. We were never welcomed into the womb. We were never welcomed in at birth. We were just treated like objects rather than subjects, rather than human beings. And this is a form of dehumanization which has a life within the core of all of us. And it leads to a sense of not feeling we have a right to be here, or not feeling valuable as a human being. So we spend a lot of time trying to fill this hole and trying to create external status because of this deep lack within us, which comes from the very beginning of how we were not welcomed in. There's a great deal of research now which backs up what we're seeing in the therapy room, that babies and prenates are incredibly sensitive and incredibly aware and open to what's happening in their environment. And this is also something that's been understood by indigenous cultures and in our own ancestral history as well, for millennia, that we are sentient, we are aware of what's going on from the very, very beginning. And so many indigenous cultures, there's a sense of welcoming in the baby. This happens at conception, and to greet the baby at birth, again, as a human being having an experience. So the babies feel fully recognized as human beings. And what I've found with my encounters with indigenous people is they tend to know who they are. They tend to know exactly where they belong in ways we don't in our culture. But in our culture, this core wound of dehumanization is so normal that we often think of it as normal. But in terms of history, in terms of the wider understanding of the human race, this is an aberration. Something I've been aware of for a long time is how babies and children seek real contact. They feel met in real contact. And when we're listening to babies and children, when we're in resonance with their experience, it's that sense of being met that makes them feel safe and makes them feel welcome. Part of the problem I see in our culture is we tend to bring in ideological ideas about how we should be relating to children, whether they are very permissive or whether they're very authoritarian. If they are ideological, they're not real. The contact is disturbed. It's based on an idea of how things should be rather than how things are. And babies and children really need us to be real with them, and it helps them to feel real. For 9 years before I became a therapist, I worked as a house parent at A.S. Neal's Summerhill School. Now, Summerhill is often thought of as the school with no rules because it's a democratic school where the rules by which the community live are decided by all the members of the community, the children and the adults together. Also, the children don't have to go to lessons, and many people think, well, children aren't going to learn if they don't go to lessons. But in fact, what we see is the natural curiosity emerges after perhaps playing around for some time, which then encourages the children from inside to go to lessons. They're interested as opposed to it being forced from the outside. And one of the things that I really learned through this experience was to listen to children. And this is one of the very formative experiences for me in the sense of realizing how to trust children. If we can meet a child and a baby as a human being, they respond as human beings. If we dehumanize them, then they respond in ways that are dehumanized. And I really saw the children at Summerhill become who we might say they were intended to be. I saw them blossom into real individuals who were able to follow their own passions, to follow their own inner gifts and develop these. This principle of trusting in the child, as a human being, I think is very central to this work. And because it's been interfered from the very beginning, it's like you can't birth yourself, someone has to interfere. You can't learn what you need to learn, someone has to interfere. This disrupts the natural flow of the child's being. This dehumanizes. And one of the central questions I have is, what does it mean to be a human being? How can we support human beings to be fully who we're meant to be? It begins in the womb. It continues through birth. And it continues through education. It's the question here is, can we follow the thread of the child's life and trust it, or do we interfere, mold it, in which case it becomes something else, and in my experience it becomes something less human than we're intended to be. Recent discoveries in the field of neuroscience have shown that our brains are actually hardwired for empathy. It begs the question, why, if we're hardwired for empathy, are there so many problems in the world, so much lack of empathy, so much disturbance in relationships, so much violence, so many wars? And what has been discovered is that actually nature needs to be nurtured. The old argument of is it nature or nurture is really a redundant argument. And part of our nature is to seek contact with other human beings, to be received as human beings, not to be objectified. And that objectification doesn't really allow those aspects of our neurology associated with empathy to develop. So we inhibit our capacity to be fully human by not treating babies and children as human. And that's something that we could change. It's our choice.